Hi everyone, and welcome back to the People in Dancefloors Podcast. And today I'm once again joined by my research partner Karen. Hi Karen. And then we have an amazing guest today. His name is Peter Sarosi, and he is the director of the Rights Reporter Foundation and also the editor of the Drugreporter website, which is how people may know his work in the UK, because it's a kind of, English-facing kind of site or platform for his work. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Julia. Hi, Karen. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks so much for joining us. First, as usual, my first question is always the same. Tell me about your background. Tell me about yourself and your background. How did you become involved in this kind of work?
Yeah, well, there is a long story and a short story. I don't know which one you want to hear, but let's start with a medium long story. So I started to learn about drug policy back when I was a university student, and so I studied history, and I found it quite intriguing. You know how people misconstruct reality and how they are kind of distort reality when it comes to drugs. And I joined a movement here in Hungary back in 2002 for cannabis legalization that time, and we organized protests and civil disobedience actions and all these sort of things. And of course, I had some personal motivation, like I used some drugs myself, but I would lie if it was only because of my personal experiences. So this issue is um, also very interesting because the most marginalized and most rejected group of society are people who use drugs. I think in all countries in Europe, and I always found it quite a challenge, to try to change the misconceptions of society about drugs and people who use them. And I also found that uh, it is very much connected to human rights, and I started to work for a human rights NGO, the Hungarian Civil Liberties Union, in 2003. I visited a few international conferences, such as the Drug Policy Alliance conferences in the US, or the International Harm Reduction conferences that had a great influence on me and impression on me. And together with my colleague István Gábor Takács, we started to discover, explore the power of video storytelling back in 2006, 2007, when YouTube came up, when this was quite a new thing. And we were one of the first people who started to record with a video camera international events such as the Commission on Narcotic Drugs in Vienna, which is like an annual meeting of the UN on drugs, and the International Harm Reduction Conference or the DPA conferences in the US. So we just, bought a camera, and my colleague went to a training course in the US to learn how to use the camera, how to edit videos, and we ended up with being a kind of filming crew, and sometimes we call ourselves the video chronicles of the harm reduction movement, because we are that's our mission, that we try to reflect the diversity of this movement and give a voice to those communities who have often no voice in the mainstream media. And in 2016, we left Hungarian Civil Liberties Union and we created our own NGO, the Rights Reporter Foundation, and we brought along the website, which is, you mentioned, Drugreporter, which has contents in 3 languages now: Hungarian, English, and Russian. We have 2 colleagues who are working with Russian video contents, one from Ukraine, one from Russia, and we also do training courses for other activists and students. So we have a course at the Central European University as well. teach young people, how to use the camera and how to communicate with the media. So that's the story in a nutshell. But if you have any more questions, I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. I mean, there's lots of things that I guess you anticipated, which I was going to ask you about anyway, which is great. I think the first thing is, talk to me a little bit about the Rights Reporter Foundation. What are the main aims? What is it about? What kind of projects have you done, and what do you envision for it?
The Rights Reporter Foundation is a human rights organization, so it is not solely focusing on drug policy. However, our main issue is drug policy, of course, but we also advocate for or promote the human rights of other vulnerable groups, such as people living with HIV/AIDS and LGBTQ groups, or migrants and refugees here in Hungary. So right now in Hungary, we have quite a repressive regime and a repressive government when it comes to this kind of sensitive social issues. They are very socially conservative, and they introduced repressive policies in many issues and fields. They criminalized to be homeless, for example, and we adopted a national drug strategy that aims to create a drug-free Hungary. It actually expired in 2020, and our country didn't become a drug-free country, of course, but it shows like the attitude, what kind of political environment we are in. So right now this is a very small organization, and in the past couple of years we are increasingly focusing on Hungary again, because we see that kind of backlash against civil society and human rights issues here. But still we are doing a lot of work for other big organizations, filming work, and also training courses mostly in Europe. So we are mostly working in Europe, but we have cooperation with other networks from other continents. So we did video training in like Bangkok or New Zealand. So I think what we do, there is a kind of demand for it in all parts of the world. Using videos as an advocacy tool, and also we are also interested in other parts of the world, because this is a global issue, drug policy reform, and it's so much interconnected. The whole global drug market and drug policy. I think it's a global issue.
I'm finding this conversation very interesting, because your journey through this field has been quite an extensive one, and it goes back to the early 2000s. And I'm curious if you maybe notice, from an activist perspective, some changes throughout the years, maybe improvements, maybe other things which are not improving, and how do you think this will play along in the coming years now?
To answer your question, it is very difficult to answer your question with like one sentence, because we have a mixed experience. That what I see is there is a growing gap in the world in drug policy. So what we see is that some parts of the world, such as North America, are going ahead with cannabis reform, and now almost everywhere in North America you can go to a store and buy cannabis legally, and also we can see a big change of paradigm in regard to harm reduction, such as drug consumption rooms and overdose prevention sites are mushrooming, and maybe not as a high speed as we would like to see, but at least it's a huge difference. Like when we were in the US back in early 2000s, that was like the policeman of the world and the tough on drugs and drug war and all these things, and now we can look up to America, when we would like to find good practices. So that's a big change, and Europe, I think, is a bit like lagged behind, and that's another good positive development. And especially in the eastern part of Europe, what we see is, as I said, it's a backlash and as a crackdown on civil society and a crackdown on harm reduction. So in the first decade of the 21st century, we saw a huge increase in investment into harm reduction and some changes, positive changes in drug policies. What we see in the past 10 years is the opposite. So less resources on harm reduction, less political support. NGOs are struggling to survive, services closed down, people are left behind without any kind of support. So and the same we can witness in Asia, with this extremely repressive policies such as in the Philippines. So it's a very mixed picture, and we hope that what we will be able to achieve in the long term is to close this gap in global drug policies somehow. If you go to the UN, such as the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, the change is very visible. So first time we went to the CND, Commission on Narcotic Drugs, 2002 or 3 or whatever year was it, then we were we found a very hostile environment to civil society. So we were almost kicked out just using our camera on the corridors. There were very aggressive security guards, and we were not let into meetings as NGOs. So now what we see is like great civil society presence. The language of the discourse on drug policy changed completely. So harm reduction gained some kind of legitimacy in the drug policy discourse. Some governments are now actively promoting involvement of civil society. So the international discourse changed immensely, and I think that's a very positive development. So we hope that this will be kind of, as you know, there is this saying that the future is here, but not evenly distributed, and this is what we see, that the future is already here in some parts of the world, but some other parts are just stagnant in the past.
Yeah, I always think sometimes in the last 10 years, there's been kind of progress or advances, and I was doing the air quote around progress in relation to cannabis. And so we think about that, we sort of focus on that too much compared to actually the disinvestment in harm reduction, which has affected, every other drug user that isn't a cannabis user is kind of losing out, whereas maybe cannabis users or sort of cannabis policy is kind of gaining ground. And I think it's important that we remember that, again, it's, we're all in it together, and I think it's like, you can't just be, I think it's difficult to accept for it to be one drug to the detriment of other drugs or users. So yeah. But certainly it's interesting to hear you reflect on the changes that have happened at the international level, because those, I think, are really, perhaps most significant in terms of kind of shift in the needle, I guess so, despite the kind of illiberal trajectories that you can see in like the Philippines, for example, or even Hungary.
Yes, but if we speak about changes, we should not only look to the kind of macro political economic processes and developments, but how the public conceives and perceives drug users and how that changed in many societies. I think that's amazing, and there are many people who we should be grateful for that, like Gabor Mate and people like him, like this kind of people who are influencing the public opinion on how we are how we are conceiving drug as a person who is with drug dependence, for example, and we are now speaking much more about the role of childhood trauma and social determinants of drug problems, and how drug dependence is kind of embedded into bigger social injustice issues. So all those things, I think they are really great, developments. Maybe they did not reach to the wider public yet, but many people are now thinking differently when it comes to people who use drugs, and not only cannabis users, but people who use other kind of drugs.
Yes, I fully agree. In fact, this shift is being experienced in Malta right now, and until a couple of years ago, it was predominantly a criminal image, and or maybe the image of someone who is sick and homeless and also has a drug problem. And today there are other images coming in, and that gives a better picture and a more truthful picture of different types and different levels of drug use. And I also agree with you that although there has been an improvement on the cannabis front, other substances and people who use these drugs have been, unfortunately, sometimes forgotten. So that is something which maybe is being at least nationally not addressed. So I think it's something that maybe it will be hopefully addressed in the coming years too.
Yep.
I've got a question about your experience of using film as a tool for activism. So essentially, I think there's a lot of, you said that there's like a big demand and an appetite for people to understand how to use the tool of film. So you have put on things like training for students and so on and so forth. But I'm just wondering whether in your assessment of having used film as a tool for, a number of years now, what do you think are its kind of strengths, and what do you think are its kind of limitations? Because I initially approaching it as with my ignorance and lack of practice and lack of experience, I initially felt like it was going to be kind of groundbreaking, and then I felt like that actually there was some limitations to it, that it wasn't just going to kind of be this kind of magical tool that was going to resolve all the problems in terms of people's understanding about drug user narratives, for example. Yeah,
I think there is a power of video storytelling, and there are limits, of course, of it. And what we discovered throughout the years is that video advocacy, of course, we celebrated it as a great new innovation like 15 years ago, but it proved to be a double-edged sword, because a lot of people use video who are not promoting human rights and dignity of people and evidence-based policies, but just try the opposite. So there is a kind of noise on social media, and we have to compete with this noise, and we have to make sure that our voice is heard in this huge noise, and that's very different from the beginning of online video making, when there were only a few people working on it, and it was quite innovative. And now it's like a huge competition, and unfortunately sometimes not only the good messages are spreading with light speed on social media, but sometimes the misconceptions and prejudices are also so just think about now the Joe Rogan scandal, and all this stuff. Like, a lot of people use video who don't use it for promoting good causes, or at least if they promote some good causes, that on the other side they are also promoting something which is not so good. And my colleague Istvan once compared our work as that, like we are a kind of prism, and the light of people who are working on this field are going through this prism, and it is like painted into colors, reflected in different colors. And this is how he sees our mission, that we need to reflect this kind of colors of this movement. And sometimes it's a challenge, to always give a balanced and diverse reflection of this movement, because the diversity of it is increasingly, it's growing, in high speed as well. So, there are so many intersectional issues in this movement, and sometimes, if we go to a big conference and we don't cover someone's issue, or some groups are not covered in the video, or not appearing in the video, then that can be a problem. So we have to be kind of very open and inclusive, and it's not just an attitude, but you have to work on it. You have to talk to a lot of people. You have to consciously think about it, and that's a big challenge. And also sometimes it's very tiring to go to film somewhere, when you are traveled a lot, and sometimes we edit on site, and that's means that we don't sleep much. So, or at least my colleague doesn't sleep much, who is doing the editing sometimes. So it's like it's like a lot of work to do this in a good way, in a proper way.
So it's like hardworking, and then sometimes the reward is delayed, in part because you've got to compete with noise. You've got to compete with so much other content that is being produced all the time. And I guess, you were saying, at the start when YouTube first arrived, it was full of potential and opportunities and possibilities. And now, I personally feel like I can't keep up with the kind of Instagram video posting individuals, or TikTok and all that. I just don't know where to start. And it seems like there is a real hunger from people to consume kind of first person narratives, which I think are having seen some of the films that you made, particularly the one about the history of the harm reduction movement. I thought there was a lot of first person narratives there. There was a lot of a feeling like you could connect to the person and hear their stories and kind of get to know them. But I think, in a way that's even different from, a person making a video and themselves talking about their own experiences, which I think is the kind of content that people want now. It's like that sort of, I'm talking to you, to the screen, but that there's no filter, and it's as if like I'm addressing you as a friend, rather than having a further mediation of like a filmmaker or somebody that,
Yeah, we have been doing this for a long time now, so 20 years, and when you are working, or when you work for such a long time, you also change. So probably we changed a lot since we started this work. And when we started this, I was in my 20s, so I was kind of just right after university, and right now I'm teaching at university, so it's like different stuff, different life, different people are maturing, and probably and it's also good, to see your limitations, that we are not young. I mean, I'm still feel young, but sometimes, as you said, there are generational issues, like TikTok generation and TikTok and all those social media, which we are not familiar with because it's not our generation thing, and it is a challenge to remain open to because the drug scene is changing a lot, and there are new groups coming in, new drugs coming in, and you should remain open and try to see the spots, what is changing, what is important, and how to show that. Sorry, Karen, you wanted to ask something?
Yes, I'm a bit curious because from what I can observe is that sometimes it seems that this type of content remains kind of isolated within certain circles of people obviously interested in the topic. However, I'm curious, how would it be possible to kind of merge or collaborate with mainstream media so these images are, or at least language, is also replicated in mainstream media, which is potentially the best tool to reach the most difficult group when it comes to mentality about people who use drugs, because these platforms you are mentioning, TikTok, they are mostly used by young people. And young people tend to have more available sources of information, so they tend to have a more balanced mentality when it comes to people who use drugs. However, people who are in between the ages of 50 and over, their only source of information is now Facebook and obviously the newspapers and the media. So I'm curious if you ever tried to collaborate with mainstream media or if it was a problem.
That's a very important question, and you are right to point out that especially older generations, but I think it's still true for middle-aged people and some young people use a lot of mainstream media still. So it's the fact that social media use is increasing. It doesn't mean that mainstream media will cease to exist. It is changing. You see that there are fusions of mainstream media and social media, so it will transform both parts, the social media and mainstream media. It doesn't mean that mainstream media will disappear. And right now, an average European citizen watches like 3 hours a day television. So television is still very powerful, and we. That's why we, for example, have a training course on media communication. Just last year we had like 3 courses, media communication courses. This year there will be like 4 or 5. So we train people how to communicate with the mainstream media and how to do good press releases, how to write press releases, how to organize a press conference, how to give a television interview. And when I am playing, the stupid television reporter asking some annoying questions, test questions from people, and then we talk about it together. So that's that usually it's a quite very useful experience for activists and students, to prepare how you can feel comfortable in situations where most people are very uncomfortable. When television is coming to your office and you have to stand in front of the camera, and all people are a bit frightened. But if you practice, you can improve your skills a lot, and that's why we have this training. And what the other question you asked, like how, for example, we can cooperate with the mainstream media, and that's also a very good question, because we found out that the media, especially television, they are very happy to cooperate and receive visual material, visual contents from us. So sometimes we give television news or TV shows, we give some B-rolls and some footage, what we have ourselves, because television is always hungry of visuals, and they are happy if you feed their hunger of visuals. And if you don't feed them, they will use some crap. That's why you see so many sensationalist background pictures and B-rolls when it comes to television shows on drugs. Oh, it's about cannabis, but someone is shooting in the background, so that they don't have anything else to show. But if you give them not copyright, like no problem with copyright, and that's good for both sides, because you control what images, what visual the mainstream media will have, and they will be also happy because they have free materials to use. So this is just one example. Of course, if someone is interested, we will have more training courses on media training. So we talk about that a lot.
That's very interesting. Thank you.
That's great. I was thinking about some article I read recently about how poorly drug users are represented in mainstream media because of stock images. It's just like the same stock images repeated over and over again, which are like, just very, very unrealistic and narrow, and don't do anyone any favors in terms of providing an understanding. So it's great that you provide that, ability for mainstream media to access, more nuanced representations. So I mean, I don't have any more questions, but Karen, do you have a question that you wanted to ask a question about human rights?
Yes, maybe I'm a bit interested. How do you see, because all of a sudden there's a kind of a revival of human rights talk when it comes to drug policy, at least in some areas of the world. And I'm interested about your observations when it comes to kind of a tokenism human rights, or is it really a shift towards human rights policy?
Again, it depends on which part of the world we are speaking of. I think in like, let's say, Western Europe and in North America, you really see some shift. When governments speak about human rights, it's usually only window dressing, and it's not, there are no genuine intentions behind, but they just want to kind of follow the flow, and just it's because of the public pressure. But that's not a problem, because if they are sensitive to public pressure, then that's good for us, whether it is genuine or whether it's not. And the language in the long term, even if sometimes these nice words remain on paper about human rights, and these documents are sometimes just remain in the shelf, and nobody implements them, and nobody monitors and evaluates the implementation of that. But at least in the long term, I think that has a tremendous opportunity for us to change the language of how we are talking about drug users, how we are talking about drug policies, in what context, and in this respect, human rights language is very useful. I don't think that in like media communication, human rights language is the most useful, for example. So like sometimes when you want to speak about human rights, you should not use abstract professional language and jargon, and you have to kind of make people understand through everyday life stories what those abstract ideals mean. Because when you just repeat these human rights ideals without explaining what does it mean, you will not have an impact. So what I think would be very important in the policy level is to have some kind of mechanisms and instruments to monitor and evaluate the human rights impact of drug policy, and that's what we are trying to do. I'm the member of the Civil Society Forum on Drugs and the EU Commission's expert group, and that's one of our aims or talking points, that we would like to see that there is a monitoring of human rights impacts of drug policy that is like mass incarceration and impact on racism and all this stuff, and we don't have that kind of tools and mechanisms. So the human rights only when it comes to the drug policy documents, it's in the preamble, and yeah, we need to respect human rights. But when it comes to monitoring, evaluation, or even like practical actions of drug policy, you don't see that reflected. Like how, okay, human rights, but how and what? So we need to feel that with content, with substance, and that's what we are working now at the EU level. And I recommend every activist in their countries to do the same, like not only to talk about human rights principles and ideals, but see how you can do actual monitoring and evaluation of that, and in that how you can work together with human rights organizations who are currently not focusing on drug issues as much as as they should be, because most human rights organizations, for most of them, it's like a very marginal issue and they don't really take attention. But if your advocacy group cooperates with them, builds a partnership, maybe that can put to the agenda.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Is that connected to the Global Drug Policy Index project?
You mean no? That's a different one. But the Global Drug Policy Index is also a very important project by the IDPC, International Drug Policy Consortium, and Input, and that aims to kind of create a mechanism to evaluate drug policies in general, and human rights is one part of it. And I think that's a very important tool, and I'm looking forward to seeing more countries being evaluated in addition to my own Hungary, which was evaluated already with the drug policy index, and that's actually had a very bad score. We are like, Hungary is like one of the worst countries in terms of drug policy index. But the thing I was talking before, it was mostly focusing on the EU level, so the European drug strategy and European action plans, and how the European Union can create these mechanisms. But of course, it's globally, that's an issue globally as well.
No, I was just sorry, I got confused, but I'm fascinated to learn that there's actually something going on in Europe. As you know, in the UK, we're kind of cut out from Europe now. Like, I feel like I'm just like more and more distant from it, and I don't get to hear like really good European news. So it's good to hear.
Yeah, we still consider you as part of Europe. So
thank you, I appreciate that.
And at the Civil Society Forum on Drugs, we still have representatives from the UK. So I myself, I think we should distance ourselves from kind of this political level of separation of the UK, and as civil society, we should kind of ignore this stupidity of what happened, because that's like we should not let them win, like to separate people in different countries, because if we believe in this European project, I think we need to think about Europe as a whole. And even I consider part of Europe my Russian comrades from Russia, civil society, even though according to some people, Russia is a different world and the Russian people are different and things like that. But I think civil society should create a real internationalism if the politicians are not able to do that.
Yeah, I fully agree. I'm totally behind that, and I thank you for bringing that up as a reminder for us to continue to be united and to work together across boundaries. So yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Peter.
Thank you.
I really appreciate your contribution, and I think you've given us a lot to think about, and definitely a lot of ideas about kind of strategies that we can adopt as activists and civil society going forward. So yeah, thank you so much for that, and thank you, Karen, and
thank you all, and thank you.
Yeah, we'll see you soon again for another episode of the People and Dancefloors podcast. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.